welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Yin Khvat. Today we ask whether a historic shift is underway in Europe. Is its centre of gravity moving eastwards thanks to the Ukraine war efforts of Poland and other ex-Eastern Bloc countries? With me to discuss this are Legislator Ching-yi, Democratic Progressive Party Legislator, Taiwan Legislature's Foreign and National Defense Committee member, and former Taiwan Ambassador at Large and Geneva Delegation member, and Marcin Jerzewski, European Values Center for Security Policy Taiwan Office Head, Taiwan NextGen Foundation Research Fellow, China Observers in Central and Eastern Europe, or CHOICE, Association for International Affairs contributor. And I also speak with Antonina Ushkiewicz, a senior Fulbright Fellow at Indiana University Bloomington and founding director of the Taiwan Lab Research Center at Jagiellonian University in Krakow. Legislator and Marcin, very warm welcome to the show today.
Thank you.
We start the show in Ukraine. Days before the one-year anniversary of Russia's invasion, US President Joe Biden made a trip to Kyiv to meet President Volodymyr Zelensky and show US solidarity and commitment to Ukraine. The trip was reminiscent of former US President John F. Kennedy's visit to Berlin in 1963 at the height of the Cold War. That's because no other visit by a US president has been made to a war zone without US air control. Biden traveled to Kyiv from Poland and back again. The ex-Warsaw Pact country's importance to the United States and NATO can be summed up by this.
The United States needs Poland and NATO as much as NATO needs the United States, because there is no way in which, for our ability to operate anywhere else in the world and our responsibilities extend beyond Europe, we have to have a security in Europe. It's that basic, that simple, that consequential. So it's the single most consequential alliance, I would argue, maybe the most consequential alliance in history, that not just modern history, but in history. This is a critical relationship for the United States. And we thank you for all the cooperation and help.
Over the past year, Poland has become the front line of the NATO alliance, and no other nation has become more important to the West's efforts to repel Russia. Poland championed the provision of Leopard 2 tanks for Ukraine through a skillful pressure campaign. Warsaw has sent more military, humanitarian and financial assistance to Kyiv than most other Western countries, and it has received around 10 million Ukrainian refugees, the latest figures showing more than 1.8 million of them remaining, more than any other country. Marcin, if I could start with you. So has Poland moved from the fringes of America's foreign policy to the center?
I think that what is really instrumental in our attempt to understand the current relationship between Warsaw and Washington is precisely what you mentioned, that Poland is at the very front lines of not only the European Union, but critically NATO, the security alliance. And therefore the importance of the Polish-American relationship is greater than ever. However, despite the many achievements in cooperation between Warsaw and Washington in the domain of security, challenges remain, especially as Poland is one of the most drastic examples of democratic backsliding in Europe, and the federal administration of President Biden has expressed quite explicitly its concerns about, for example, the declining independence of Polish judiciary and attack on independent media.
Let's look back 1 year, Marcin, and tell us about what the relationship with America was like a year ago.
Whenever we talk about collective security or any international organizations, in fact, something that is a challenge is the so-called collective action problem, whether all members that benefit from the collective security umbrella, in the case of NATO, will pull in equal weight to ensure that they contribute to the creation of this collective security that is greater than the sum of individual capacities. And I think that what we witnessed over the past year is that Poland, despite being one of the newer NATO members, having joined the alliance in 1999, is really capable of safeguarding the external border of the alliance and positively contributing to safeguarding all of NATO members.
Legislator, Poland is of course instrumental to Taiwan's efforts to support Ukraine. The town of Jerzewski has become a logistical gateway to Ukraine. On this map you can see there it is, close to the border with Ukraine. Can you tell us about Taiwan's efforts to support Ukraine?
I think since the war beginning, all the Taiwanese, they are really focused on what will be happened in the world. Some people say the war will stop within 1 week. But now we see actually the Ukrainian people, they're fighting for their country for 1 year, and they own the support from the national societies. So our MOFA in our parliament and in our government,
the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Yeah, so we agree that our government to have our support to Ukraine, and in the initiate, all the people they have the willing that they could donate money, they could donate the equipment for the people especially refugee of Ukraine. So during the initiate of the war, most of the people they support that. But until now, I think the support not only very transit, it needs long-term support. So until now, we have some cooperate, especially our budget, to try to rebuild and reconstruct the school, the church, the hospital in Ukraine. But all the help, all the support need to go through from Poland. But also we have several citizens, several Taiwanese citizens live in Ukraine during the initiate of the war. And so our office in Poland, they are very important to try to connect all the needs. So some Taiwanese people and many of the refugees from Ukraine, they go to Poland by this channel, and the Taiwanese government and organizations, they help them to from east of Ukraine to Poland. And I think in these systems, actually have Taiwanese people and the Taiwanese office help them.
So actually allowing their safe transport.
Yeah, transport to Poland. But also now we are still have another next programs that some of the member of parliament in Poland, they talked to me that they have a medical service for the people and the military, the surgeons from Ukraine. So we are also trying to have a cooperations with Poland people to help the Ukrainian people in Poland.
Tell me about the generators and the heaters, which was supplied to the three towns, Kharkiv, Kherson, and Mykolaiv. The most recent, I guess, donation.
Yes.
This was also through the Taipei representative office in Poland.
And because in Europe just passed the winter seasons, the lack of the energy, lack of the resources. So our the office in Taipei tried to buy the to buy the energy resources for them to support, especially to keep the people to get at least the energy there. That all that is Taiwan, not only Taiwanese government but also Taiwanese people try to help them. But another very important, and I want to point out, is all we know the refugees, they not only need to have a place to live, but also they need to work there. The school, the children, they need educations. So we have another budget to cooperate with the NGO in Poland to help the refugees from Ukraine to get their educations, to have their the lifespan, but also to help them to have their life in Poland.
Now, Poland was not part of the former Soviet Union, but during the Cold War, it was part of the Eastern Bloc countries, which came under the Soviet sphere of influence through their communist governments. The former Soviet Union was made of 15 republics, including, of course, Russia, and from its western side, the 3 Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, as well as Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. The USSR lasted from 1922 to 1991, when it was dissolved following the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. 1989. Marcin, so Poland is not the only country that borders Ukraine. What is it in its history that can help us understand the incredible support from Poland?
I think it is also critical to emphasize that while Poland has been one of the leaders in providing support to Ukraine and people affected by the full-scale Russian invasion on the country, there has been a lot of solidarity all across Central Eastern Europe. And whether we're speaking about Poland specifically or other examples in the region, it is important that we remember that Poland and Ukraine are post-colonial societies that understand the struggle for the right to assume and assert your national identity that is independent of the colonizer. And additionally, people of Ukraine have a special historical connection to Poland through, for instance, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which also stretched its boundaries over much of what constitutes today's Ukrainian nation state. So if we look back at the historical record, the connection is quite explicitly strong.
And there was over 100 years of colonization, occupation by Russia of Poland before World War I. Yeah. Yes,
absolutely. So Ukrainians and Poles share not only a history of colonization by Russia, but also by the Austria-Hungary Empire. But I think that especially the occupation, colonization by Russia still resonates very strongly with today's national psyche of people of Poland and people of Ukraine. So in a way, something that is felt as strongly in Kyiv and its environs as it is in Warsaw is the presence of the Russia threat. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, there was a brief period when we were all hoping for a democratic Russia in the early years of the Yeltsin presidency, but those hopes were very soon extinguished. So that is also something that is similar in the historical and political trajectories of Poland, Ukraine, and Taiwan, as we seek to assert our national identity that is distinct, as we seek to assert our democracies, we do it in the shadow of a regional authoritarian neighbor.
Legislator, yeah, there are many parallels with Taiwan. Can you talk to whether you see any similarities, parallels between Japan, which is, inevitably, as they say, going to be drawn into a Taiwan contingency, just as Poland, just on the border with Ukraine, is inevitably part of, this authoritarian threat and the threat to Ukraine?
I think that is very interesting, the viewpoint. Of course, I think not only US, not only Japan and Taiwan. Another country I want to point out is Lithuania. Actually, Taiwan, we are facing the threat from China. But Japan also are facing the threat from North Korea and Russia. So all we are facing the same threat from very huge countries. They have a very huge economic power, military power.
And they are nuclear powers too.
Yes. So in Ukraine and Poland, they are also the first line to facing the Russia. So they need to stand together. At the same time, in Taiwan, also the Lithuania, why they together with Taiwan and another we call smaller countries? Because if all the smaller countries we are not become alliance, the single country to face the Russia or the China, I think any single countries are very difficult to serve. Abe, Prime Minister, he talked about if Taiwan have something happened, Japan will also. I think we say that Taiwan 有事, 日本有事. I think that is a very important point. So I always say Taiwan is not all the Chinese threats not only for Taiwan. That is security in regional. So I think the relations between Poland and Ukraine, but it's very similar with Taiwan and Japan, or even Taiwan and US. So that is why we need to change our mind to how we look at the Russia invest to Ukraine. That is a value difference. That is a security in the regional. So in Taiwan, the support from Japan or the cooperate, especially in military and economic, in Taiwan, Japan, or even US and Korea. I think that is very important in further step.
And of course, Japan has also thrown its support behind Ukraine, trying to stress that the two regions are interlinked, and actually, as you said, it's a global threat.
Yes.
And yet Poland has been accused of democratic backsliding and has slipped in world democracy rankings such as Freedom House and VDEM. President Andrzej Duda's right-wing populist Law and Justice Party came to power in 2015. Since then, it has removed judicial independence, cut access to legal abortion, and harassed activists for women's rights and LGBTQ+. It's often stood with Hungary in resisting refugees from Syria and other Middle Eastern countries. Marcin, do you see any conflict in this democratic backsliding and the support for Ukraine, which is backed by, the free world?
Actually, when we take a step back and try to understand what happened in 2015 that led to the rise of the far-right populist Law and Justice Party, and the situation in Ukraine right now, we can see that there isn't really a divergence in those motivations. So in 2015, Europe was facing a major migration crisis, and you rightly mentioned that Central Eastern European countries, including Poland and Hungary, were particularly reluctant to share the burden of...
the quota that Germany had wanted all European countries to share.
So this is something very typical for a populist playbook. You create the enemy, you create a they, and the migration crisis added the fuel to the fire of those divisions in Europe. And Poland, after the Second World War, became a very homogeneous country for the first time in history. So before it was truly a salad bowl, as sociologists would say, of different cultures, and the forced migrations erased that picture of multicultural Poland. So it was therefore very easy to paint the picture of migrants as the other. At the same time, Poland was quite enthusiastic to return to the West. And what I mean by that is Polish people's desire to enter collective organizations, collective economic and political organizations such as the European Union, and collective security organizations such as NATO during the period of democratic transition. So Poland, similarly to the playbook deployed by Viktor Orban in Hungary, sought to portray itself as the real defender of European values. And I think that was a very twisted perception of what European values really were. But on the one hand, you were stopping the enemy, and on the other hand, you were still consistently emphasizing those pro-European sentiments in the population. So right now, this threat to European unity is quite visible, with Russia attacking Ukraine, that is increasingly willing to interact with the EU and with NATO.
And interesting that you did mention that Biden had criticized Duda's right-wing, sort of liberal backsliding. And Duda had actually been a very firm Trump supporter.
Absolutely. The relationship between Warsaw and DC was much stronger during the 4 years of Trump administration. President Trump also enjoyed a rather large audience during his rallies, which coincided with his visits to Poland. And a Democrat administration following the 2020 election in the US has added additional strains to the relationship between Poland and the United States. But in general, the transatlantic relationship between two countries is described as strong, and the issues of rule of law were somewhat understandably put on a back burner, given that the most pressing issue in relations between Warsaw and Washington these days is mounting a sufficient and therefore effective response to the atrocities perpetrated by Russia in Ukraine.
Legislator, can I ask your opinion? Is there a kind of rehabilitation of Poland's reputation that's happened over the past year because of its being a strong opponent against Russia and as I said, its incredible support for Ukraine? Has this provided an opportunity for it to restore its reputation?
Actually, I want to say the relations between Taiwan and Poland actually not only because of the war, after the war. Actually, before 2020, we have twice the parliament visit to each other. The Poland parliament, they invite our deputy speaker, Cai Chi-chang, to have a delegation to visit to their parliament. At the same years, they also have a delegation visit to Taiwan. So before the war, or before the pandemic, actually, we have a very close relations between Taiwan and Poland. And now after pandemic, of course, because of the support and cooperations to support Ukraine, but also we also help to each other during pandemic. So actually,
and Poland actually sent us the largest number of vaccines from Europe, only third after the US and Japan.
Yes. So last July or August, we have another delegations to visit Poland. When we arrived at Parliament, they told us we appreciate about their donate for vaccine. At the same time, they say they also thank you for our support during pandemic because we donate face masks to them. So I think that is very good relations. We try to close more and more, and all we know we need to share the same value, but also we need to cooperate and help to each other. So not only in pandemic, but also how to face the threat from the war. And then we also were to share the same very important mission, especially in fake news and disinformation. Another very important information is Taiwan is very difficult to participate in organizations. Global organizations, for example, the UN, the WHO.
Yeah, so under pressure from China.
Yes, but the Poland parliament members, they support us, support Taiwan to participate in WHO. So we also to spread our appreciate to them.
So what do you think is the basis of that? Why are they so supportive of Taiwan?
I think they understand how difficult when we have a very strong neighborhood and not friendly to you. Because Poland had ever be, their countries are also very difficult. They had ever be broken down from another countries to invade, and they built their country very difficult. So I think for them that is a very difficult history, and they believe that is a very important value, especially democratic value. And Taiwan, we are very similar. We are so difficult to build our democratic systems, but also we are still fighting for our identity in the global society. So I think that is why they support us so much. And so that is, we always say that you need to help yourselves. People will help you. That's very similar with the Ukrainian people. They're fighting for themselves and the global society to help them. So I think every time we visit to Poland or communicate with Poland, they always say we are friends. We share the same value. We also have very difficult history. And we also need to face the transit justice. All this are very similar between two countries. So I believe all the relations between Taiwan and Poland, we are friends, and we will become closer and closer.
It's a very good point you make about Taiwan also going through the transitional justice period, as we've just marked 228 Day. Marcin, how would you characterize Poland-Taiwan ties?
With deep gratitude and all due respect to the legislator, I have to mention that I am somewhat more pessimistic, or should I say critical, in evaluation of Poland's approach to Taiwan, especially when contrasted with other countries in the region, including Lithuania and Czechia. It is clear that Poland has taken a more reserved approach to embracing Taiwan. Certainly not only in terms of parliamentary diplomacy, but also institutionalization of ties between two countries. We have seen some important developments, such as the signing of the agreement on cooperation in judicial matters and criminal cases.
And in terms of practical benefits of that, how will we see the practical benefits?
So this is a very important instrument that allows for cooperation between judicial systems of two countries. So, for example, the transfer of sentenced persons, and we have already seen such transfers take place from Taiwan to Poland. So this is an important tool for cooperation between criminal justice systems of both countries.
Do you know the numbers of how?
So far, there has only been one transfer from Taiwan to Poland.
And in the areas of Legislator mentioned in the area of sort of hybrid warfare, cyber attacks, can you talk about, because this is a strength for Poland, this area?
Absolutely. However, as of now, Poland still seeks to prioritize economic exchanges as the most important area for cooperation between both sides. For instance, last year we saw the visit of the chief official of the Polish government for foreign investment. That visit took place shortly before the establishment of a bilateral group supporting joint research projects on semiconductors. So economic cooperation is still the #1 priority for Poland. And the reason why I said that I am more critical is due to some of the internal directives of the Polish Foreign Ministry on cooperation with Taiwan. So one of the documents issued in 2018 explicitly mentions that in case of a potential clash of interests of the People's Republic of China and Taiwan, priority should be given to projects that benefit the relationship between Poland and Beijing rather than Poland and Taipei. So there is still room for improvement and for Poland to remove some of the self-imposed boundaries on cooperation with Taiwan.
So why do you think this is, do you think this is particularly important given China's no limits friendship, partnership with Russia? Do you see a conflict
Absolutely.
for Poland?
Absolutely, and I think that this is once again a place where it is useful to evoke a comparison or a contrast with other regional countries. So, for instance, Czechia recently witnessed a presidential election where President-elect Petr Pavel spoke explicitly of this no-limits partnership between China and Russia, or in other words, a growing confluence of strategic interests between Beijing and Moscow. And within NATO, there is clearly a realization of this growing cooperation. However, a lot of Polish officials have yet to wake up to this new reality where Moscow and Beijing are playing to the same goal, and it is impossible to divorce responding to one set of authoritarian threats from Moscow from that coming from Beijing.
And what is your view about China's motivations behind something like its supposed so-called peace plan? I mean, what motivations does it have in either extending or resolving the Russia-Ukraine war?
There is a perfect Mandarin phrase that encapsulates what the main motivation of China is, and that is the 话语权. So what China wants is this discursive power. By putting out documents such as the 12-point peace plan, China is really positioning itself as a discursive power that asserts to still be a neutral player in the war, even though, as I just mentioned, the cooperation between Russia and China on strategic and security issues only continues to expand. And that is visible in several points of the peace plan, but something that I think really demonstrates how vapid some of those points are points 5 and 6 that speak about China's support for humanitarian relief and also protecting civilians and prisoners of war. And the reason why I'm allowing myself such a strong assessment of the plan is that in terms of humanitarian relief, China provided only slightly over $2 million to relief efforts, having a significantly larger economy than Taiwan, which last year donated over $41 million and currently, as Legislator mentioned, plans to increase this figure to $59 million in the 2023 fiscal year.
Yeah. So, yeah, in proportion, that's really quite a small support for Ukraine in terms of a humanitarian response. Legislator, do you have a view on whether it's in China's interest for the Ukraine war to continue?
I think now the China's positions, they try to pretend they are neutral. But during the war, I think that actually not any position is neutral. So when the US and the Europe countries, but also Taiwan and Japan, all we are stand with Ukraine. I think China's neutral actually means they actually they stand with Russia. So the position is very important. That means they are still not think. They still keeps their viewpoint that invade is their right. But I think that the global society is we could not to agree with that. So
is there a link here to Taiwan? So it also wants to gain Russia's support in any Taiwan contingency, and also have the right to do that with Taiwan.
So I think that is Russia invests to Ukraine. They also said that no, that's to freedom them. But also for China to invest to Taiwan, they have the same value. They have the same statement about, oh no, that because all we are the same countries. So I think Russia and China actually now, every country know what's their viewpoint about the war. But that is why I mentioned about during the early stage of the Russia invest to Ukraine. Some Chinese people and some people in Taiwan, they say, look, if Taiwan want to fight your identity, want to join the global society, you will have a similar similar with Ukraine. But after 2 weeks, all the global society, we know Ukrainian people, they're fighting for themselves, but also until now, so many countries to help and to support Ukraine. So that is very important to China, because during the very early stage, Russia invests to Ukraine. China also waiting for the time to invest to Taiwan. So the longer the war, or the value of the Russia, I think it will make China know invest to Taiwan is very difficult. I think that is important information from the war.
And as you pointed out, it's no longer a beneficial comparison for China, given all the support and also the tenacity of Ukraine.
And I want to say that now, some people will say war only between two countries. But in global societies, in global economics, now all we know, the war between Russia and Ukraine. But every country is actually will suffer from the energy price elevate, the short of the supply chains. So now it's not only about the human rights value, about the country's peace, not only for that, but also if we want to make every country's have a better life or better economic, regular, more smoothly in economic activities, all we need to support the war. Not only Russia to invest to Ukraine, but also China to invest to Taiwan.
To find out more about Poland's relations with Taiwan and China, I spoke with Antonina Uszkiewicz. She's a senior Fulbright Fellow at Indiana University, Bloomington, and founding director of the Taiwan Lab Research Center at Jagiellonian University in Krakow. Let's take a look.
I don't think that this communist past has anything to do with today's relationship between China and Poland. Actually, 30 years ago, in the early 1990s, when people thought about China, they mainly thought about cheap, poorly made products produced in China and imported to Poland. So that was the main image of China that Polish people had. However, today, 30 years later, interestingly, people do not have that kind of negative image anymore. People think about Huawei, people think about Xiaomi, and they think that, Chinese technology is pretty good and buying Chinese products is a good investment, unlike, 30 years ago. Of course, some people are also aware of internal problems of China and the fact that China is being accused of human rights violations in Tibet or in Xinjiang. However, the main idea about China is that China is a great global power and one of the most powerful economies in the world.
Do they share, some of the concerns of the broader EU Parliament, where that power has become overly aggressive?
If you look at our political circles, you can observe that this attitude has also evolved. 5, 6, 8 years ago, when the BRI was announced, there was some sort of enthusiasm in Poland about the prospects of cooperation with China. There was also a big enthusiasm when President Xi Jinping visited Poland in 2016. However, a few years later, Polish authorities realized that those were just the prospects, and nothing really was done in that matter. Actually, 2 years ago, our foreign minister Zbigniew Rau openly said at one of the press conferences that Poland expects more from the 16+1 format, which is supposed to connect China with the Central and Eastern Europe and is supposed to be a platform for cooperation of the countries of our region of the world with the PRC. We also have to notice that Poland has a huge trade deficit with China. We export to China 1/10 or of the value of what Poland imports from China. So that means that Polish money is flowing to China, and that trade relationship is definitely not beneficial to Warsaw.
After the fall of the Berlin Wall and Soviet Union, it very quickly democratized. Can you talk about the relations over that period with Taiwan?
It's interesting that Poland and Taiwan started their democratization processes more or less at the same time, because we are talking about the late 1980s and early 1990s. In Poland, the date of June 4th, 1989 is especially symbolic, because this is the date of the first partially free elections in which communists were totally defeated, and which was a huge victory for opposition democratic forces. And this is a symbolic beginning of democratic Poland. You probably know this date. It seems familiar. June 4th, 1989 is also a date of the Tiananmen massacre in Beijing. So indeed, democratic Poland was finally free to decide with which countries it wants to develop friendly relations. And Taiwan was among those countries which finally became open and became a possibility for the democratic government in Warsaw.
You were absolutely right, said that Taiwan was also democratizing round about the same time. Taiwan held its first fully democratic election of its president in 1996. Can we talk a little bit about the relationship between Ukraine and Poland, maybe over the last few decades?
These relations were pretty complicated, because you have to remember that even though right now Polish and Ukrainians are pretty much brothers, in arms and supporting each other, the history was not equally nice. And historically speaking, these relations were not always proper, not to mention some cordiality or the sense of brotherhood. We also had some territorial disputes. However, these days, all these historic problems were set aside. And right now, well, we are kind of united against the same enemy, that is Putin's Russia. Poland plays a critical role as a frontline country of the NATO alliance, of the European Union. We also should mention that Taiwan got involved in helping Ukrainians in sending humanitarian aid to Ukraine. And importantly, Poland is a sort of transit country for Taiwanese aid. Simply because of geographical and logistic context.
If you could summarize for us two things. One is, how would you differentiate how Poland views both Taiwan and China? And then on the other side, I'm curious about, how does Beijing view Poland within the EU?
When it comes to trade relations with China and Taiwan, China is still a priority for Poland. Even though relations with Taiwan keep opening new windows of opportunities, Warsaw is still concerned about possible retaliations, possible reactions from Beijing if, for example, Poland decides to act like Lithuania. We all know very well that Lithuania made some sort of pro-Taiwanese shift and wanted to develop a really nice friendly relations with Taiwan. And in a way, Vilnius was punished by China. My impression is that Warsaw is still concerned about possible retaliation from China, and perhaps more incentives or more positive examples from the region of Central and Eastern Europe are needed for Warsaw to become more brave in developing relations with Taiwan. Poland has two very important legal agreements with Taiwan. Last year, a memorandum of understanding regarding semiconductors was also signed between Poland and Taiwan. The academic and scholarly cooperation between Poland and Taiwan is developing very nicely. So indeed, we could observe over the last 2-3 years some gestures from Warsaw.
As Antonina Ustakiewicz mentioned, historical relations between Ukraine and Poland have not always been so rosy. But today, the two former Soviet bloc nations are united against the shared authoritarian threat from Russia. On Poland's Independence Day in November last year, President Zelensky recorded a message saying Ukrainians will always remember the help they received from Poles. You are our allies and your country is our sister. We have had our differences, but we are kin and we are free. Marcin, let me ask you, can you talk about some of the previous disputes between Ukraine and Poland?
Absolutely. I have already characterized Poland and Ukraine as post-colonial societies, and I think that this legacy of colonial oppression, the limited space for the people of both Ukraine and Poland to manifest their respective distinctive national identities is at the very core of those conflicts. So one of the most contentious characters in recent history of Ukraine is Stepan Bandera, who by some in Ukraine is considered to be a national hero, who in 1941 participated in the declaration of a free Ukrainian state, but others view him as a far-right nationalist and a fascist who's behind the death of Polish and Jewish citizens on Ukrainian lands. But irrespective of the historical particularities of Polish-Ukrainian disputes in the past, I think that the ability of both nations to put those divisions behind them is also a sign of growing maturity of national identities in both countries and just greater confidence that people have found in those respective national identities.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes their alliance today, even more remarkable. Legislator, Russia denies Ukraine its sovereignty, wants to erase its identity. However, after 1 year, the very opposite we can say that the very opposite has been proven in that Ukraine still stands, as Joe Biden said, and it's been an incredible promotion of Ukraine's sovereignty and identity for all the world to see. So are there parallels? We talked about that there have been parallels with Taiwan. What should China be taking note of, in your view, in this regard?
I think China needs to understand the piece of the regional security is not only their viewpoint about that. For example, last year's Speaker Pelosi visit to Taiwan. China, they do not understand between democratic countries, visit to each other is normal, it's our right. The speaker actually be supported by people. So all the democratic countries, all our value and all the politicians, their activities actually support or right are from people. That is totally different with China. So China's their statement or their attitude actually make all the people understand they are different with all this democratic society. So China need to understand they have not any right to invade another countries, and they have not any right to interfere in any country's relations. Between Taiwan and Ukraine, between Taiwan and Poland, between Taiwan and US. I think that China needs to understand about that.
And Marcin, going back to Ukraine, Ukraine wants to join the EU, wants to join NATO. Poland has joined, as we mentioned, in 1999 and 2004. How quickly do you think Ukraine could join, these institutions?
I think we have to be very realistic about the prospect of Ukraine's participation in those collective organizations. I think that the European Union will continue to play an important role in the post-war recovery of Ukraine. I believe that in reconstruction, the European Union will actually be one of the major players. But at the same time, the European Union is not a club which is a free-for-all. There's a very specific set of criteria, the so-called Copenhagen criteria, that a country needs to meet to be able to join the structures of the European Union. And let's take a look at many of Central Eastern European countries. From the moment when they began transition to democracy in late 80s, early 90s, it took them over a decade to finally join the European Union on May 1st, 2004, in the largest ever enlargement of the Bloc. So why I believe that the European Union will provide Ukraine with ample support to become closer to eligibility for membership status, it can take time, and that's not something that we can expect to happen a year or two from now.
And it's interesting because we talked about the democratic backsliding, didn't we, of Poland, which has been a member, as you said, since 2004. Can you talk about, just briefly, some of those requirements in terms of, say, rule of law, transparency?
Absolutely. So the criteria for eligibility for membership in the European Union are actually quite broad. So some of them are more political, some of them are more
Where do you think there would be sticking points for Ukraine?
I think that one of the issues is corruption. Ukraine has yet to fully deal with concerns about transparency and accountability of its governance system. There are some areas of good governance where Ukraine is a regional leader. For example, as we see during the law, I think that Ukraine is a fantastic example of how digitization can make positive contributions to good governance. However, concerns still remain, for example, with regard to various forms of corruption.
Legislator, very final question. We've got 1 minute left. So with this new, what we can call it a new strategic partnership between Ukraine and Poland, especially as Ukraine rebuilds after the war, through the war and after the war. Many analysts are talking about a shift, which is where we opened our show, a shift in Europe's political and military center, which is moving eastwards. Do you believe the future of Europe will lie eastwards of Paris, London and Berlin?
I think that there will be we could look at if what will be new strategy after the war, because in Taiwan, in our MOFA, actually initiated Ukraine actually they belong to Asia region, but now we shift their mission to Europe's missions. So that is, I think that for us, that is very important to changing their office to another. To actually, we can become European missions in Taiwan's foreign affair.
We just spoke about how the strong support from Poland during the Ukraine war could be shifting the center of gravity for NATO and also for Europe as a whole. Will the future of Europe lie eastward? We want to hear from you in the comment section below. And if you like this show, please hit like and subscribe to our channel. Take care and see you next time.